Hello, and thanks for watching this Acumatica video on the Financial Reporting Engine, or we like to call it ARM, A-R-M. So let's jump in. So to get started, the first area in Acumatica is under Financials and Report Definitions. So Acumatica's Financial Reporting Engine gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility and power to design the financial reports the way you want to. So when we go into report definitions, you can see a number of different reports in our sales demo data. And what you notice is, in addition to the report definition, you have the description, but you also have this concept of row sets and column sets. And these are extremely powerful. You also have a concept called unit set, which we'll get into in a little bit. So let's open up our standard P&L report. And let's go through the settings. So a couple of things. You have a code and description. Those are obvious. We have a different type. So Acumatica's reporting engine can do general ledger reports as well as project accounting reports. You have row sets and column sets. We'll get into those in a second. We have unit sets. We'll also get into those in a few minutes. You have the settings here. And the settings are the parameters that you use when you're going into the report. So if we make this half screen and we end up running this report, this will give us a good example of being able to see half the screen of the report and half the screen of these report definitions. So let's take a look. Let's preview this report. We'll make it half screen. The first thing is when we go to run the report, again, these are the report parameters. And you can see here, we're requesting the ledger to be entered, and we're requesting the starting period. And that's what you see here, the ledger and the starting period. Now, you could turn these off and pre-fill in the default ledger, in this case, or you can ask it to request. Same thing goes for the starting period. If you wanted to, you could create a report that says, only show me profit and loss for 2018. You could do that. You can make as many report definitions as you want and hard code in the periods. That's certainly possible. Not practical, but definitely possible. So if we run this report, we'll just get this up on the screen here for May 31st. Let's go back actually, and let's run it for 12/2018. There's a little bit better data there for us to see. Now, continuing on in our report definition, you can see the sitemap. This is where we put the report menu. Now, the sitemap is based on the classic user interface of Acumatica, which we're not running right now. We are running the modern UI, which has our work areas along the side. So if we minimize this, this is based on the classic UI. This is based on the modern UI. So this gives us a list of all the workspaces, which is along here, that we want to put the menu item in, and then what category it goes into. So if we click on, for example, the financial menu, you can see all the different categories here, and it gives us the ability to put this particular report in this particular workspace under this category. So a lot of flexibility. And of course, all of these reports will fall into the security. So you have the ability to give people rights to these reports or not rights to these reports. And of course, no report can be defined without margins and with print areas and stuff like that. So you have all those settings as well. So let's jump back into a concept we call row sets. And then we'll get into column sets and then ultimately unit sets. So if we click on the pencil next to the row set, what we see here are the list of rows that make up this particular report. So just to get started, and the reason I bring this up in split screen is so that you can see both at the same time. And we'll make a couple of changes to this report so we can see how a change impacts the report. So first off, we have a blank line. We have a revenue line. It's a caption, and that shows up here. Then we have another space, and we have sales revenue as a caption, which shows up here. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And then we have a line called sales details. Now you don't see it quite clearly over here, but sales details is a GL line type, right? So we have GL, we have caption, we have lines and totals and headers and stuff. But this is a GL line. Now we're pulling our data for the GL from this data source. So let's open this up for a second. What this is doing is it's pulling all of our general ledger accounts for the turnover being the period to date, and the year to date for the accounts that have account class sales. So let's take a look at our chart of accounts real quick so this all makes sense. So we'll go back to our menu and we'll go to finance and we'll open up our chart of accounts and we'll make this a little bit bigger. So we talked about how we're bringing in all the GL activities for a row set. We'll go back for account class sales. So let's go back again and let's filter by, we'll click on the column here, we'll filter by sales. So all of the chart of accounts that have been indicated as the account class for sales. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's what we see here. So sales revenue and freight, sales revenue and freight. Now the reason you don't see these other chart of accounts is because if we scroll over in our row sets, and we'll just make this bigger for now, under sales details, you can see that we're suppressing empties and hiding zeros. So because there's no activities for those, we're not seeing those lines. Now, if we go back to our data source, the other thing we have is the ability to filter by the GL account. So we can put any accounts we want on this particular line. We don't have to group them together. But in this case, we're grouping by account class. But the other thing we can do is, instead of showing every GL account for that line, again, if I go back to the report, we're showing the lines that have activities. I could summarize and say, don't expand. And I can click OK here, and we'll hit the save button. And now what we'll do is we'll minimize, and we'll rerun this P&L report. So we'll go to financials, and we'll run our P&L. And we'll run it again. And now, instead of seeing these two lines, you end up seeing sales details, which of course matches our total sales revenue because it's a total for those two lines. But that's what you get when you don't expand. So let's go back to our report definitions. And we'll open it up. And let's go back to row sets and take an additional look. So we talked about how this is the first line, this is the second line, and everything. That's based on this code here. And you can make these numbers anything you want. And based on the number order, we can put different lines wherever we want. So now when we look at this example, 101 to 102, you might ask the question, well, Greg, how do I put a line in between 101 and 102? There's no space. Well, what you can do up here is renumber. So I can come in here and I could say, well, I want to renumber everything by a step of 10. And I want to use 4 digits. And when I renumber, you can see everything now skips by 10. So that's kind of useful because now I have the ability to maybe put 105 in there to insert this in between. So that's the numbering sequence. Now, we talked about the sales detail and how this is coming from this data source, account class. And then we have a line, and then we have a total line. And you can see, again, the type is total. And we're using this formula right here in order to total. So basically what we're doing is we're saying equals at 0090. And we're taking that total line. Pretty straightforward and easy. But if we had multiple lines, we may use a formula and basically continue to add, such as this one. So for total revenue, we're taking 110, which is this line up here. We already got the total from this. And we're adding 170, which is total other revenue, from here. That's how we're getting total revenue. And again, if we go back to our P&L, you can see here is total other revenue. And here's total revenue. Okay. So that gives you an idea in the breakdown of the different row sets and what we can do with it. Now, a couple other things here. If you're looking to copy, for example, the style, so maybe I add a new line here, but it doesn't quite look like all the other rows. You can use the copy and paste style. So copy the style from one line and paste it to another. So that's fine. Also keep an eye on your indents, right? So if you add a new line, you may want to change the indents to match what you're doing here. So your indents are right here. Sales revenue is indented. And then you also have things like height and all those kinds of settings that you would normally expect. Okay, so let's go back to our report definitions and let's take a look at our column sets. So if we click on our column set, for this particular report, we have two columns. We have our year to date and we have our period to date. And the other column we have here is basically this heading up here. So our report is basically pulling the account name, whatever your company name is. And you could see this formula. And you could find all this in the help, by the way, if you're looking for a specific formula. Or you can use an existing column set and mirror it for your other reports. The second one is basically just a text string that says profit and loss. And then we're pulling, as of December 31st, 2018, it's pulling this formula to calculate that out. Okay, so these are the different lines, and this particular line is giving us our underline. So now if we were to add other columns, we'd want to copy this style over to get the underlines. So looking down below, so we got our year-to-date column. The first thing is the type. So we can make this a GL or a calculation or description. Now certainly this is a description. This description is pulling from the GL account. But the GL actually pulls from a data source. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom, again, just like the row sets, we have a data source here. And that data source is essentially pulling the amount type for the ending balance. Now on the flip side, our other column is pulling the amount type of a turnover. So that's the turnover for the current period, period to date. Again, if you like the style, you can always copy and then come over here and paste the style. Additionally, keep an eye out for your formatting. So this is the numbering formats. So this is how we're able to get a nice numbering format that has commas between every 3 digits. And we also support rounding, so you can round, for example. And that's basically your column sets. Now, if you're looking for some additional column sets, let's close this for a moment. And we'll close this one too. And we'll go back to our report definitions. And let's look up another report, maybe, for example, the profit and loss 12-month. Let's take a look at our column set here. Now you'll notice the column set, for example, has at least 12 columns plus a total. And you can see what we're doing here. We're doing a turnover for the current period. And if we scroll to the right, actually this is the total. And what we're doing when we look at the data source is we're doing a turnover, but we're offsetting the period by 1. And for the next column by 2, and so on. That gives us our rolling 12 months. Now let's run this report so we can see what it looks like. We'll do a preview here. And we'll leave everything alone here, and we'll run it. You can see now we have a rolling 12-month period. So that's another good example. Now let's close this and let's look at another kind of report, which is also interesting. Here is a profit and loss that's consolidated. Let's preview that report. And we'll go back to 12/2018 and we'll run it. So what we've done here is we're looking at different data sets, US, Europe. We're consolidating them. These are all year-to-dates. And then we're looking at period-to-dates. So let's see, how do we do that? So we'll minimize this, and we'll take a look at our column sets. So if we scroll down, these are all GL fields. and we take a look, what we've done here is we've used different GL ledgers. So in Acumatica, we have different ledgers. And these ledgers allow us to have essentially different sets of books. Now, you always have an actual ledger. That's where your live transactions are always flowing into. But you can use other ledgers for budgeting purposes. You can also use other ledgers to import from other companies. So we have the ability to import from other tenants or other instances of Acumatica and drive that information into these other ledgers. When you look at your chart of accounts, you have the ability to map the GL accounts to the appropriate source account. And then lastly, we also have a concept called allocations. And again, we won't go into detail about how GL allocations work, but GL allocations allow us to take data from one ledger and bring it into another ledger, among other features as well. So you can see again, we're using this particular column is using this ledger and providing the ending balance. And this particular column is using this ledger with an ending balance. And then one of the things we skipped over earlier when we were talking about column sets is this calc column. So this is really cool. Instead of pulling data from the GL, we have the ability to do a calculation. So pretty easy here. We're taking columns B and we're adding C, and that's the value for this particular column. If we look again at our report, that's what we're doing here. That gives us our 59 million. Okay. And the only difference in here is we're doing period to date. So once again, if we take a look at our data source, instead of the ledger and an ending balance, we're doing the turnover. So now let's take a look at unit sets. So if we go back to our main P&L, you notice we have a unit set called branches. Now, if we run this report, we'll just run it for a second. We can see what it looks like. And I'll pick 12/2018. What we have in this report is this small tree view button, and it's called groups. And what it does is it allows you to, I'll make it bigger. What it does is it allows you to click and go through a tree view and get just the data for that particular unit section. So in the case of our sales demo, we have multiple companies with different branches, and I can click through them and get my different data. So I can look at, for example, my revenue, my entire P&L for the Services East branch, or for the Product Retail branch, or I can go back and consolidate. So this is very easy to use, and this comes from an area in Acumatica called unit sets, and we won't go into too much details on it, but take a look at an example, and we're looking at the branch unit set. We look at the branch unit set in detail. You can see the entire tree view, and you can see where are we pulling the data for that particular view. So if I go to products, we can see product retail, that's one line, and we pull the data source from, you see this similar data source dialog box that we've been looking at. We're pulling out the starting branch, product retail. And if we go back down to this line, we're pulling the starting branch, product wholesale. And again, if we go back up to all, and we're looking at our companies, you can see once again, starting branch of product retail to product wholesale. That gives us our entire company of data. Now, in Acumatica 2019, we've rolled things and made things a little bit easier regarding companies and branches. Actually, this may have come about in 2018, but we have the ability in the data source to actually choose the company and not have to deal with branches. It used to be that we had only branches and we didn't have a company hierarchy. But now we have the ability to have companies and then branches underneath. And this data source now has this filter here. Now, at the time that this unit set was created, Acumatica didn't have the company profile, so that's why it was set up this way. So that's it. That's financial reporting in Acumatica, to use the software and report your financials the way you want to, with a lot of flexibility to also continue to build on, add additional reports with different row sets and column sets and different unit sets, and essentially get the information the way you need it. So if you have any questions, at the end of the video is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching.